My name is Victoria Hale. I am 38 years old, and on Christmas Eve, I watched two police officers carry sealed evidence boxes out of the house my parents had spent 20 years pretending did not belong to me. 3 hours earlier, my mother had called to tell me there was no room at the family table. Again, she said my brother Daniel had invited important guests. She said the dining room would feel crowded. She said I would understand because I had always been independent. I stared through the front windows of the largest house in town, the one I had bought 6 months earlier, and watched snow settle across the stone steps. Then I looked at the place setting in front of me. White porcelain, silver cutlery, a folded linen napkin, and beside the plate, a thick envelope containing bank records, property transfers, and a document with my signature on it. A signature I had never written. For years I believed my parents forgot me because Daniel needed more attention. I believed every missing birthday invitation, every Christmas without a chair, and every family photograph taken before I arrived was thoughtlessness. It was not. They had been keeping me away for a reason. My work as a forensic compliance auditor had taught me one thing. Numbers do not become careless. People do. That afternoon, I found a payment connected to my new house. It came from an account opened in my name when I was 19, an account I had never seen. Before I tell you what happened when my parents arrived, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and what time it is where you are right now. At 8:17, headlights swept across my driveway. My parents stepped out first. Daniel followed. Then a fourth person emerged from the car, carrying the framed photograph that had disappeared from my grandmother's study the week she died. That was when I understood. They had not come for Christmas dinner. They had come to take the house. My parents had no idea I was standing behind the glass, watching every step they took. Snowflakes drifted through the warm glow of the driveway lights. My mother smiled as though she owned the place. My father adjusted his expensive wool coat. Daniel carried himself with the same confidence he always had whenever he believed something already belonged to him. The framed photograph in his hands stopped me cold. It had always hung above my grandmother Eleanor's fireplace. The picture showed her standing beside a young oak tree with two little girls, me and my cousin Rachel. Daniel wasn't even born when it was taken. Grandmother used to tell me that photographs remembered the truth even when people decided not to. I finally understood what she had meant. I opened the front door before they could ring the bell. My mother spread her arms. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." Her voice sounded warm, practiced, as though she hadn't called only a few hours earlier to explain why there wasn't room for me at dinner. "I thought there wasn't enough room at your table," I said. "There wasn't," she answered with a small laugh. "That's why we decided to celebrate here instead." Here, not my house, just here. She walked inside without waiting for permission. My father followed. Daniel carried the photograph straight toward the living room. I quietly closed the door behind them. For years I had wondered whether I was imagining the difference between how my parents treated us. Daniel never questioned where tuition money came from. His first apartment appeared after college, as though someone had waved a magic wand. His business loans somehow disappeared whenever he struggled. Meanwhile, I worked nights through graduate school. I bought second-hand furniture. I skipped vacations. I tracked every dollar inside color-coded spreadsheets because nobody was coming to rescue me if I failed. That habit eventually became my career. I was now one of the lead forensic compliance auditors at a national consulting firm. People hired me when financial records no longer made sense. Most fraud wasn't hidden by brilliance. It was hidden by arrogance. People believed nobody would ever look closely enough. Grandmother Eleanor had always admired that about me. "Details save honest people," she used to say. After she passed away 3 years earlier, I inherited only a small wooden jewelry box. Daniel inherited nothing. My parents insisted grandmother had revised her estate before she died, because she wanted peace in the family. I believed them, mostly because grief makes people trust the familiar. Inside that jewelry box, I found a tiny brass key taped beneath the velvet lining. No note, no explanation, only the key. I spent almost 2 years wondering what it opened. Then 6 months ago, while purchasing this house, the answer appeared unexpectedly. The attorney handling the closing asked why I wanted an old trust account transferred at the same time. What trust account? He frowned. The Hale Family Educational Trust. I had never heard those words before. The account number was listed in my paperwork. The beneficiary was me. The opening date matched my 19th birthday. Someone had forged my signature to authorize changes years earlier. The attorney assumed I already knew. I pretended I did. That evening, I requested every archived document available, professional habit. Never react before collecting evidence. During the following months, I built a timeline. Every transfer, every signature, every amendment, every property purchase. Patterns slowly emerged. Money disappeared from the trust shortly before Daniel bought his first condo. More vanished before his wedding. Another large withdrawal appeared when he opened his restaurant. Each transaction carried paperwork supposedly approved by me. I had never seen any of it. Yesterday, everything changed. One final archive arrived from the regional records office. Attached to it was an old audit file that should never have existed. Someone had quietly flagged irregularities 12 years earlier. The investigation had been closed before completion. No explanation. Only one handwritten note remained. Verify original beneficiary. Those 3 words kept echoing in my mind. Tonight I intended to confront my family. Calmly, methodically. No accusations, only questions. Daniel set grandmother's photograph above my fireplace exactly where it had hung in her home. He stepped back and smiled. "Looks right," he said. I stared at him. "No," I replied softly. "It looks familiar." He frowned. "What does that mean?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Nobody else had been invited. I checked the security monitor. Rachel stood outside holding an old metal lockbox against her chest. When our eyes met through the camera, she whispered only 4 words. "I found Grandma's ledger." And suddenly I realized the documents in my envelope were only half of the truth. Rachel's hands were trembling. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, but I knew her. She only shook like that when she had already made an impossible decision. I opened the door. Without a word, she placed the heavy steel lockbox on the entry table. "I almost didn't come," she whispered. "What changed?" I finally realized Grandma wasn't protecting me. She looked directly at my parents. She was protecting Victoria. The room became perfectly still. Daniel laughed first. "Oh, please." My mother forced a smile. "Rachel, sweetheart, Christmas isn't the time for family drama." Rachel ignored her. "This belonged to Aunt Eleanor." She rested her hand on the lockbox. "She asked me to keep it if anything happened to her before Victoria turned 40. I frowned. "I'm only 38. "I know," Rachel swallowed. "But she also wrote one exception." She looked at me. "If anyone ever tried to take your home, I was supposed to bring it immediately." Every pair of eyes turned toward me, then toward the lockbox. My father finally spoke. "What ridiculous story is this?" Rachel reached into her coat pocket. She held up a tiny brass key. My heart stopped. It matched the one hidden beneath the velvet inside the jewelry box Grandma had left me. I slowly removed my own key from my pocket. Neither of us had ever seen the other's. The keys were identical, except for one tiny engraved letter. Mine carried an A. Hers carried a B. 2 halves, 1 lock. Grandmother had planned this years ago. Daniel's confidence faded for the first time that evening. "What exactly is inside?" he asked. Rachel looked at him. "I never opened it." "You expect us to believe that?" "I didn't have the right." She turned back to me. "You did." I placed both keys into the twin locks. Click, click. The lid lifted with surprising ease. Inside were 3 objects: an old leather ledger, a sealed envelope, and a portable hard drive wrapped inside a faded Christmas handkerchief embroidered with the initials E.H. Grandmother Eleanor Hale. I reached for the envelope first. Across the front, written in her unmistakable handwriting, were just 8 words. "For Victoria, when truth becomes more important than peace." I carefully unfolded the letter. "My dearest Victoria, if you are reading this, then the family has finally asked for something they never earned. I am deeply sorry. I hoped they would choose love instead." I felt tears building before I had finished the first paragraph. Grandmother explained that shortly after my 19th birthday, she had established an irrevocable trust, funded by the sale of several commercial properties. Not for Daniel, Not for my parents. For me. She believed I would protect it, rather than spend it. She wrote that my parents never forgave her decision. She feared they would eventually attempt to gain control through forged authorizations. That sentence made my stomach tighten. She had predicted everything. The next page listed every asset originally transferred into the trust. The amounts matched almost perfectly with the audit trail I had reconstructed over the previous 6 months. Except for one detail. There had been far more money than I ever realized. Nearly $8 million had disappeared over 12 years. Daniel leaned closer. Those papers don't prove anything, I looked up. They don't have to. I picked up the leather ledger. Every Christmas, every birthday, every financial transfer. Grandmother had documented everything by hand. Dates, conversations, account numbers, names, reasons. It wasn't a diary, it was evidence. My professional instincts immediately noticed something extraordinary. Each handwritten entry referenced supporting documents stored elsewhere, receipts, bank confirmations, property filings, even notarized copies. Grandmother hadn't trusted memories, she trusted records, exactly as she had taught me. Rachel quietly handed me the portable drive. I never knew the password. I connected it to my laptop on the dining table. A single folder appeared. December never lies. Inside were hundreds of scanned documents, canceled checks, emails, wire confirmations, property contracts, audio recordings, video journals. Everything had been organized with the precision of a forensic investigator. Then I opened one file, a video. Grandmother appeared on the screen, wearing the same green Christmas sweater she wore every December. She looked directly into the camera. If this recording is being watched, someone has finally tried to convince Victoria that she owns less than she truly does. Nobody spoke. Grandmother continued. I have hidden copies of every forged signature and every unauthorized transfer. If my children deny what they have done, give these files to the authorities. Do not argue. Do not negotiate. Let the documents speak. Silence filled the room, heavy, unavoidable. Then my father suddenly stepped forward. He reached toward the laptop. I calmly closed the screen before he could touch it. No. His face changed. The warm Christmas smile disappeared. For the first time all evening, I wasn't looking at my father. I was looking at the man who had spent years hoping I would never discover the truth. And then the front door opened. 2 detectives walked inside. Neither of them looked surprised to see me. One of them asked only one question. Ms. Hale, are these the original records you reported this afternoon? The older detective gave me a calm nod. Ms. Hale. Yes. Before we proceed, I need you to confirm one thing. He pointed toward the lockbox. Are those the original documents you mentioned when you called our financial crimes unit this afternoon? I believe they are. He looked at my hands. Have they remained in your possession since you opened the box? Yes. Has anyone touched them? No. He turned to his partner. Good. Everything about their movements was measured, deliberate, almost quiet. Exactly how professionals behaved when they expected the truth to be stronger than emotion. Daniel finally exploded. This is insane, my father stepped between us. There has been some misunderstanding, the detective looked at him politely. There usually is. He removed a small evidence kit from his briefcase. We'll let the records explain. That sentence almost made me smile. For years my parents had relied on louder voices. I had always relied on better records. The detectives photographed every document before touching anything. Every page, every signature, every handwritten note, the hard drive, the ledger, grandmother's letter, even the 2 brass keys. My mother folded her arms. This is our family, she looked at me with wounded eyes. You actually called the police on Christmas Eve. No, I answered quietly. I called them because I found evidence of identity fraud involving an irrevocable trust. Silence. Even the fireplace seemed quieter. Daniel laughed again. You've lost your mind, the younger detective looked at him. Sir. When exactly did you first learn about the Hale Educational Trust? Daniel answered too quickly. I never heard of it. The detective opened his notebook. Interesting. He placed a photocopy on the dining table. Then perhaps you can explain why your personal loan application from 11 years ago lists the Hale Educational Trust as collateral. Daniel stopped breathing for a moment. Only a moment, but I noticed. So did the detectives. He looked toward our father. It must be some mistake. My father immediately interrupted. The bank handled all that paperwork. The detective simply wrote another note. I see. He wasn't arguing. He was collecting contradictions. Exactly what I would have done. Then he asked another question. Mr. Hale, did your daughter Victoria ever authorize withdrawals from this trust in your presence? My father answered immediately. Yes. I reached into my envelope. Without speaking, I placed my passport renewal records beside the questioned authorization. The dates matched perfectly. The supposed authorization had been signed in Chicago. My passport showed I had entered Canada that morning for a week-long compliance conference. My boarding passes, hotel invoices, conference registration, expense reports. Every record still existed because my profession required detailed documentation. I hadn't saved those papers to defend myself. I had simply never thrown them away. The detective compared both timelines. Then he looked back at my father. Would you like to change your answer? No response. My mother finally spoke. You don't understand. We were trying to keep the family together. I looked at her. For 12 years? She lowered her eyes. You always managed on your own. There it was. The sentence I had heard my entire life. You manage. Daniel needs. You understand. Daniel struggles. You forgive. Daniel deserves. I suddenly realized those weren't excuses. They were their family philosophy. I simply wasn't included in it. Rachel quietly stood beside me. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. For the first time in my life, someone from my family stood beside me instead of across from me. The younger detective inserted the hard drive into an encrypted evidence laptop. Within seconds, another folder appeared. Not one I had opened. Its title read, Delayed Delivery. He frowned. This folder hasn't been accessed. He clicked it open. Inside were dozens of scheduled emails. Each one addressed to me, each one written by my grandmother. None had ever been sent. The detective opened the first. Victoria, if you are reading this after my death, then someone prevented these messages from reaching you. The second email contained scanned letters. The third contained photographs. The fourth contained voice recordings. Then came the final file, a short video recorded only 3 weeks before grandmother died. She looked weaker, but her voice remained steady. If my children are standing in Victoria's home insisting everything belongs to them, then they ignored every chance I gave them to tell the truth. My mother burst into tears. Daniel looked pale. My father stared at the floor. Grandmother continued, I have already delivered certified copies of every original document to one final person. My heart skipped. Who? The video ended before she answered. The room fell silent again. The older detective slowly closed the laptop. Then someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. Not impatient, not hesitant, almost expected. The detective looked through the glass. Then he turned toward me. I believe, he said quietly, the executor of your grandmother's final private instructions has just arrived. The knock came again. 3 slow taps, measured, confident. Not the knock of someone asking permission, the knock of someone fulfilling a promise. The older detective opened the door. A woman in her late 60s stepped inside, carefully brushing snow from her dark blue coat. She carried a slim leather briefcase that looked older than I was. She studied the room. My parents, Daniel, Rachel, me. Then she smiled gently. Victoria, I nodded. I'm Margaret Whitmore. The name hit me immediately. Grandmother's attorney, not the one who handled her public estate, the private one. Grandmother had mentioned her only once. If you ever meet Margaret, she had told me years ago, it means I ran out of time. Margaret removed a sealed envelope from her briefcase. It has been locked in my firm's vault for almost 3 years. She handed it to me. Across the front, in grandmother's familiar handwriting, were the words, open only after the first lie is denied with confidence. I almost laughed. That sounded exactly like her. Margaret looked toward the detectives. I believe we're at that point. The older detective nodded. I would agree. I opened the envelope. Inside was a notarized document, another letter, and a flash drive labeled Original Evidence Archive. Margaret spoke before I could read. Your grandmother separated every piece of evidence into 3 independent collections. She pointed toward the lockbox. One with Rachel. She nodded toward my envelope. One hidden where only you could discover it. Then she touched the flash drive. And one entrusted to me. My father suddenly found his voice. This has gone far enough. Margaret calmly turned toward him. No. It began far enough. She opened her briefcase again. Stack after stack of certified copies appeared. Bank certifications, property registrations, trust amendments, forensic handwriting reports, independent notarizations, everything carried official seals. She wasn't bringing accusations. She was bringing verification. The detective carefully examined the first report. His eyebrows lifted. This handwriting analysis was completed 13 years ago. Margaret nodded. Yes. It concludes that every questioned authorization attributed to Victoria Hale was forged. Daniel stared at our father. What is he talking about? No answer. He looked at our mother. Still nothing. Then Daniel looked back at the documents. His face slowly changed. Confusion replaced certainty. You told me, his voice cracked. You told me Victoria signed everything. Nobody answered. You told me Grandma wanted me to have the money. Silence. You told me it was legal. My father finally whispered. We were protecting the family. Daniel stepped backward as though someone had struck him. No. You were protecting yourselves. For the first time that evening, I realized something I had never considered. Daniel had benefited from everything, but he might not have known how it was obtained. Margaret quietly unfolded another document. This is Eleanor Hale's final private instruction. She handed it to me. I believe she wanted you to read it aloud. My hands trembled. Not from fear, from finally hearing the voice I had missed every Christmas since she died. I began reading. If Victoria is standing in this room, then she has already discovered something far more valuable than the missing money. I paused. Tears blurred the page. Rachel gently squeezed my shoulder. I continued. She has discovered who remained honest when honesty became expensive. I looked at Rachel. She lowered her eyes. Grandmother had known. She had known Rachel would choose truth. The letter continued. My greatest regret is not that money was stolen. It is that my granddaughter spent so many Christmases believing she had done something wrong. I couldn't continue for several seconds. Every forgotten birthday, every empty chair, every gift that never came, every phone call that ended with maybe next year. None of it had been because I wasn't enough. It had been easier to exclude me than explain the truth. Grandmother's final paragraph was short, only 4 sentences. Justice is not revenge. Justice is simply truth arriving late. When that day comes, do not become the person who hurt you. Build the table you always deserved. The room remained silent. The older detective closed the final evidence folder. Then he looked at me. Ms. Hale, we now have sufficient probable cause to begin formal criminal proceedings. He glanced toward my parents. However, one decision still belongs to you. What decision? He answered quietly. The financial losses can be calculated. The forged documents can be prosecuted. But some victims ask only for restitution. Others pursue every available charge. He paused. You don't have to answer tonight. I looked around the dining room, at the empty chairs, at the Christmas table I had prepared for a family that never truly existed. Then I remembered Grandmother's last sentence. Build the table you always deserved. I slowly picked up the untouched dinner plates. One by one, I carried them into the kitchen. Not because I was serving anyone, because I had already decided who would never sit at my table again. The dining room stayed silent long after I disappeared into the kitchen. No one followed me. No one argued. For the first time in my life, my parents had nothing left to say that could rewrite the facts. I returned carrying only my own plate. I placed it on the island. Rachel quietly joined me. So, she asked softly, what happens now? I looked through the wide kitchen window. Snow was still falling, peacefully. Almost as if the world refused to acknowledge that an entire family's lives had collapsed inside this house. I think, I answered. This is the first Christmas I'm actually free. The formal investigation lasted 11 months. Financial crimes rarely moved quickly. Every transfer had to be reconstructed. every signature examined, every property traced. Fortunately, someone had already done half the work. Grandmother. The detectives later told me they had never seen evidence prepared with such precision by a private citizen. Every receipt matched. Every handwritten note corresponded to official records. Every bank transfer led somewhere real. There were no assumptions, only facts. That was enough. 3 independent forensic handwriting experts reached the same conclusion. The signatures authorizing the trust withdrawals had never been mine. Digital analysts proved that several authorization forms had been created on my father's office computer years after the dates printed on them. Bank employees testified that exceptions had been approved because they believed my parents were acting with my permission. They hadn't been. They had been deceived too. Daniel visited me 2 months later. He came alone. No lawyers, no anger. He looked exhausted. Older, smaller somehow. I owe you an apology. I invited him inside, not because everything was forgiven, because I wanted to hear the truth. I believed them, he admitted. I never asked where the money came from. He stared at his hands. I told myself Grandma simply loved me. He laughed bitterly. That sounds ridiculous now. It sounds human, I replied. He looked up. I've already agreed to sell everything the trust paid for. The condo, the restaurant, the vacation property. I don't want any of it. I believed him, not because he looked guilty, because he had already begun returning the money before anyone asked him to. That mattered. People reveal themselves most clearly when nobody is forcing them. I can't change what happened, he said quietly. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. He stood, paused, then asked one final question. Do you think Grandma would ever have forgiven me? I thought about Eleanor Hale, about her careful records, about her endless patience, about the final letter. Yes, I answered, but only after you stopped lying to yourself. He nodded once, then left. That was the last conversation we had for almost a year. My parents made different choices. Until the very end, they insisted they had only borrowed the money, that everything had been done for the family, that I had overreacted. The court disagreed. The judge's written decision filled almost 80 pages. It described a pattern, not a mistake, not confusion. A deliberate scheme carried out over many years using forged documents and false representations. Restitution was ordered. Several properties were liquidated. The remaining trust assets were recovered as completely as the law allowed. Money returned. Time did not. There is no legal remedy for missed birthdays. No financial calculation for every Christmas spent believing you were unwanted. Some losses stay losses. You simply stop carrying them. A few weeks after the case ended, Margaret Whitmore invited Rachel and me to lunch. She brought one final package. I almost forgot, she smiled. Eleanor told me to wait until everything was over. Inside was a small wooden box, simple, unpolished, the same kind my grandmother loved. There was only one object inside, a silver key, smaller than the others. Attached to it was a handwritten tag, the dining room. Rachel looked confused. So, what does it open? I laughed. I have absolutely no idea, Margaret smiled. Oh, I think you do. The key fit an old cabinet built into the dining room wall, a cabinet I had never paid much attention to. Inside was a stack of neatly folded linen tablecloths. Nothing else. At least, that was what I thought. Behind the last shelf sat another envelope. One sentence was written across the front, "For your first real Christmas." Inside was no money, no legal papers, no secrets. Only one handwritten recipe, Grandma's cinnamon bread. The bread she baked every Christmas morning. The one she always insisted tasted better when shared with people who chose one another. Tucked beneath the recipe was one final note. Family is not the table you were born at. Family is the table where someone notices when your chair is empty. I cried harder than I had during the entire investigation, because she was right. She always had been. This Christmas looked different. Rachel arrived first carrying cinnamon rolls she insisted were better than Grandma's. They weren't. Margaret brought flowers. 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit stopped by after their shift with homemade pie. My mentor from the audit firm came with his wife. Several colleagues followed. Neighbors, friends. People who had quietly become part of my life while I was too busy surviving to notice. Every chair filled naturally. Nobody counted who deserved a seat. Nobody earned an invitation through obligation. They were there because they wanted to be. Halfway through dinner, I looked around the room. People were laughing, talking over one another, passing bread. Someone accidentally spilled cider. Rachel started laughing so hard that everyone else joined in. The house felt alive. Not because it was the biggest house in town, because it finally contained the kind of family I had searched for my entire life. Sometimes people ask whether I regret calling the police that Christmas Eve. The answer is no. Not because it punished the people who hurt me, because it finally protected the woman I had spent years forgetting. Justice did not give me back my childhood. It did something better. It gave me permission to stop living inside it. And every Christmas since then, before anyone sits down to eat, I quietly look around the table, not to count the guests, to make sure no chair has been forgotten, because no one who is truly loved should ever wonder whether there is a place waiting for them. 1 year later, I unlocked the front door before sunrise. Christmas morning had always carried two different memories for me. One belonged to the frightened little girl who waited by the window, hoping someone would remember she existed. The other belonged to the woman who finally understood that love should never have to be earned. I chose the second memory. The house smelled like cinnamon bread long before anyone arrived. Grandmother's recipe had become a tradition. Rachel insisted on making the dough. Margaret always claimed she was supervising. The detectives still joked that they came only for the bread, though everyone knew they had quietly become part of our strange little family. I walked through every room one last time. Every chair stood perfectly arranged around the dining table. Not because I was afraid someone would be forgotten, because I wanted every guest to know they had been expected. There was a place card at every setting, each handwritten by me. That small detail mattered. People notice when someone prepares a place especially for them. I certainly did. Just before noon, the doorbell rang. Rachel arrived carrying 3 warm loaves wrapped in linen. You know, she laughed, Grandma would still say mine needs another 5 minutes. She'd be right. Margaret followed, carrying fresh white lilies. They're for Eleanor, she said. We placed them beneath Grandmother's framed photograph, not as a reminder of loss, as a reminder that one honest person can change lives long after they're gone. Guests slowly filled the house. My mentor, David, and his wife, neighbors who had become friends, 2 colleagues from the audit firm, the detectives who had first believed the documents before they believed the emotions. Laughter echoed through rooms that had once felt painfully empty. Then the doorbell rang again. This time, nobody was expected. Rachel looked at me. I'll get it. A moment later, she quietly returned. Victoria, it's your mother. The room became still, not tense, just uncertain. I walked to the front door alone. My mother stood on the porch holding a small cardboard box. She looked older than I remembered, not because of time, because regret leaves marks that mirrors cannot hide. I won't come in, she said immediately. I know I haven't earned that. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Snow drifted between us, almost exactly as it had 1 year earlier. I found these while packing the house. She handed me the box. Inside were dozens of handmade Christmas cards, every one of them addressed to me. None had ever been mailed. I looked up. What are these? She wiped her eyes. You made them in school. I kept them. But every year I told myself there would be another Christmas to make things right. There always seemed to be time. There wasn't. I carefully closed the box. You hurt me. I know. You chose Daniel. I know. You watched me disappear. Her shoulders trembled. I know. She wasn't defending herself anymore. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was simply telling the truth. Sometimes that is the hardest sentence a person ever speaks. I don't expect another chance, she whispered. I only wanted you to have those. She turned to leave. Then I spoke. Mom. She stopped. I hope you find peace. She nodded without looking back. And I hope you never spend another Christmas pretending tomorrow will fix what today refuses to. She quietly walked away. I watched until her footprints disappeared beneath fresh snow. Then I closed the door. Not in anger. Not in victory. Simply because some chapters deserve a gentle ending. Rachel looked at me carefully. "Are you okay?" I smiled. For the first time in a very long time. "I really am." Dinner lasted for hours. Stories replaced silence. Laughter replaced careful conversations. Nobody checked the clock. Nobody hurried home. As the evening came to an end, Margaret gently tapped her glass. "I think Eleanor would want Victoria to have the final word." Everyone looked at me. A year ago, that would have terrified me. Now it felt natural. I stood, looked around the table. Every chair was occupied. Every face carried warmth. Every person sitting there had chosen to be part of one another's lives. When I was little, I believed family meant sharing the same last name. I spent years trying to become someone worthy of love. I worked harder. I stayed quiet. I forgave more than I should have. And none of it earned me a place at the table. I looked at the empty chair beneath grandmother's photograph. But one woman believed that someday I would stop asking for permission to belong. She was right. I finally learned that family isn't built by blood. It is built by honesty, by respect, by people who notice when your chair's empty. I raised my glass. So here's to every person who has ever felt forgotten. I hope one day you build a table where nobody has to wonder if they're welcome. Glasses touched, softly, warmly. Outside, snow continued to fall across the quiet town. Inside, the largest house in town no longer represented success. It represented something far more valuable, a promise finally kept. And before we cleared the table that night, I counted the chairs one last time. Not because I feared someone had been left out, but because every Christmas I wanted to remind myself of the lesson that changed my life forever. There will always be room for one more person who comes with honesty. There will never again be room for lies. That was the greatest gift Christmas ever gave me.